Hello, my name is Zachary Zawatsky, and this is my presentation on the potential threat to Vail's bighorn sheep herd. First, I want to cover the biodiversity loss. Biodiversity is the variety found in an ecosystem or a certain habitat. The loss of biodiversity amongst our ecosystems is occurring at an alarmingly rapid rate. Sadly, biodiversity loss is occurring in just about every corner of the United States. Biodiversity loss, example 1. Habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation results from the industrialization of infrastructure within an ecosystem's region. The development of roads, towns, and other human infrastructures divides these ecosystems into fragmented subpopulations. This increases the difficulty for wildlife to locate food, water, and shelter, as well as increases the difficulty of survival within the subpopulation. Biodiversity loss, example 2. Habitat loss. Habitat loss is defined as the outright destruction of natural ecosystems, an inevitable consequence of expanding human populations and human activities. Some examples of habitat loss are urbanization, deforestation, farming, land grabbing, dam construction, wetland loss, desertification, population growth, unsustainable consumption, and pollution. Biodiversity loss's relationship to the bighorn sheep species in Vail. How the bighorn sheep species has been affected by the biodiversity loss. Habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation has been one of the biggest threats to the bighorn sheep species. Development of roads, trams, and towns divide the bighorn sheep's access to the steep terrain to escape to, impede upon migration corridors, and shrink summer and wintering ranges. Habitat fragmentation is a contributor to the bighorn sheep species population decrease. In 1822, there was an estimated population of 2 million bighorn sheep in the state of Colorado. Due to habitat fragmentation, as well as hunting and disease, the bighorn sheep species population dropped to an estimated of 7,000 sheep in the year 1915. Biodiversity's loss relationship to the big habitat loss. Habitat loss has been a direct and permanent threat to the survival of the bighorn sheep species. With more and more habitat being lost forever each day, it is crucial that we protect the remaining bighorn habitat for the preservation of the bighorn species. The bighorn sheep are a keystone species. If habitat loss continues to threaten the bighorn sheep's survival, it could also negatively affect other wildlife and plant life species in the ecosystem if the bighorn are lost, potentially shifting the trophic levels within the ecosystems, which could create a trophic cascade. As of today, there is an estimated population of 7,000 bighorn sheep in Colorado. For the bighorn sheep to continue to remain amongst the land, conservation efforts are needed to protect the species from extinction. Biodiversity's loss relationship to the bighorn sheep in Vail. Vail Resorts is looking to develop an employee housing complex on a piece of land owned by Vail, named Booth Heights. Although Vail may own this parcel of land, the land has also been home to a herd of bighorn sheep that use the land for winter grazing. If this housing complex were to go through with development, it would contribute to the ongoing habitat fragmentation and loss that bighorn sheep continue to face. Habitat fragmentation has been one of the leading causes of population decline in the bighorn sheep species. The development has been put on has been put on stalled thus far due to the potential negative impact it could have on Vail's bighorn sheep. My target audience. The audience I intend to reach with this presentation are firstly anyone who enjoys seeing the bighorn sheep on the United States soil. The bighorn sheep are one of the most iconic wildlife species in America and are native to North America. Secondly, I aim to reach those in the conservation world. Those within the conservation realm are constantly advocating and working to protect wildlife and habitat alike. Another audience I attempt to touch with this presentation is those who have passion for the environment and its preservation for future generations to enjoy. Here is a model of my social ecological framework between human and anthropogenic factors and the ecological environmental factors of bighorn sheep and the potential impact if Vail Resorts builds on the bighorn sheep's wintering range. As you can see, there's a direct result of habitat fragmentation to the bighorn sheep due to human factors. Pollution plays an aspect in habitat loss, population decline, and endangering a keystone species. Increased human disturbance also plays a factor in habitat loss as well as population decline. As well as impacts the sheep's ability to access steep escape terrain, which they need if they feel threatened. If they don't have access to the steep terrain, the survival of the species might not continue. Some past management practices that have been used for the conservation of the bighorn sheep species. The first one I came across was restricting hunting. Restricting hunting of the bighorn sheep species was a management practice taken to help the low animal population numbers begin to increase. The restriction also allowed less stress to be placed on the animals. And another one I found was establishing refuges. Establishing refuges is taking an area where the bighorn sheep range and place protection amongst the area in order that the species has undisturbed habitat to roam on. Those are a couple past management practices for the management of bighorn sheep. A current management practice that's relevant to my presentation is suggestions for East Vail workforce of the housing subdivision and mitigation measures provided by biologists within the area of Vail. This report was put together by consulting wildlife biologists Gene Byrne, Rick Kahn, and Melanie Wolver. The basis of this report was to provide Vail Resorts with alternate development locations that do not impede on the bighorn sheep wintering range, as well as providing mitigation measures for on and off the potential development site. These mitigation measures are focused on the potential impacts to bighorn sheep and other wildlife species that are at risk of being impacted as well, such as mule deer, bears, elk, marmots, and other wildlife species. The biologists first offer the best mitigation measure that would provide long-term sustainability to the bighorn sheep herd. Then the biologists provide mitigation measures based off importance, ranging from high importance to lower importance. The biologists offer changes to the development layout, scheduling notices, and advice to ensure that everything is being done to conserve and preserve the area's wildlife. This report was and remains to be beneficial in resolving the potential issue of habitat loss and habitat fragmentation the bighorn sheep continue to face. This report is an essential safety net for the bighorn sheep and other wildlife species that could be impacted if Vail Resorts somehow develops an employee housing complex on the bighorn sheep's wintering range. The mitigation measures supplied by Gene, Rick, and Melanie help keep wildlife species in the primary focus and helps continue the protection of these creatures. One thing I may have done differently is create a system that is capable of finding individuals, companies, etc. that negatively impact the environment or wildlife species. The fines would be based off the economic, ecological value of the environmental and the species. I believe this would instill ecological responsibility moving into the future and provides a sufficient consequence for any damage caused. Overall, Gene, Rick, and Melanie were effective in outlining the most important mitigation measures to ensure long-term sustainability to the area of Vail and its wildlife species. Thoughts on the management practices. For the past management practices of restricting hunting, I think it was a smart strategy at the time. This practice allowed the species to regenerate the population. With establishment of refuges, the animals could procreate without being disturbed by human impact. The current management practices being taken to protect the bighorn sheep in Vail are very impressive and conservation focused. For some proposed management practice, if I were to propose a few management practices for the continued conservation of the bighorn sheep, I would first propose that the native habitat from which they range to be protected and returned to the bighorn sheep to the best of our abilities. As humans, we are stewards for these animals and their continued existence on this earth. If we do not put the conservation of wildlife and habitats alike as a focal point, we may very lose these species and possibly the ecosystems. Another proposition I would suggest is reducing the grazing allotments for domestic sheep and bighorn sheep range. The intermingling of domestic and wild sheep is dangerous, and because of the possibility of domestic sheep spreading disease to the wild sheep herds and causing the wild sheep species to die out due to spread of disease. Here's an example of potential merchandise that could help support the bighorn sheep and the conservation needed for the species. And what I came up with was a t-shirt design with the front of the t-shirt being an image of two prominent male bighorns, as you can see here. And the back of the shirt would have a map of the wintering and summer ranges of the bighorn sheep species in the Vail, which would be the Gore Range in this particular circumstance. And I would include a short statement or that reads, "Defend the bighorn sheep's home," and proceeds from sales from the shirt could go to the conservation of the bighorn sheep and protection to its habitat, as well as the shirt itself could spread the information for the need of conservation and the need for the protection of habitat loss and habitat fragmentation of the bighorn sheep. Future directions for the Vail bighorn sheep. As of right now, the proposed housing development by Vail Resorts is currently on hold due to the possible negative and irreversible impact it could have on the region's bighorn sheep species. Although Vail continues to push for the employee housing complex to be installed, it is being met with equal pushback from the people of Vail who are against the development. Thank you. My name is Zachary Zawadzki. This is some of my contact information. Thank you for being an audience member in this presentation.